Before we start, I have a suggestion. If you are already knowledgeable in Husserlian Phenomenology, I would encourage you to try to do a phenomenological reduction through an intentional analysis of the text phenomenon. So if you know how to do phenomenology, stop this right now and describe the text phenomenon. I would also encourage you to tell as many people as possible, knowledgeable in phenomenology, to do this. It would be interesting to see what will happen if you do. This is a way to see how phenomenology is seen right now. Different people see phenomenology differently. If you know phenomenology, you can test yourself and see what you will end up doing and what you will end up with. Be quick, as this opportunity only may be possible for a limited period of time. You will understand why this is the case through this lecture series. If you only know a little about phenomenology, I will give a little guidance that you too possibly could do a phenomenological reduction. You can start from a standard text, for example a spread from an ordinary book, and begin to parenthesize as much as you can. You should try to enter an epoche and suspend your judgment. You should try to leave the natural attitude and turn to the text as a phenomenon, to the text as it presents itself to consciousness, to your mind body, and then use the method of free imaginative variation. If you think you know how to write a text that is good to read, you need to parenthesize all you think you know. You could do this by writing down all, or at least most, of the propositions you come to think of, and then put parentheses around them. You should try to focus your attention on as many aspects as possible of a text, and then begin an attempt to doubt them appropriately. If you don't understand how to begin, you can take a book on typography and parenthesize all that is stated about text in it. Furthermore, you can try to intend as many aspects in a text as possible. Use your intentionality to pay attention to as many aspects as you can and express them in parenthesized propositions. Subsequently, you should use the methods of variation and ideation for each proposition. As you do that, you could try to lay bare all the intentionalities that are used when a text is read or used in some other way. So now you can stop this and do that first, and you can return when you are finished or when you have tried to do it for a couple of hours. Another way to start the process is to answer the following two questions. What is a text and what is reading? I will give you a couple of answers and then you can just continue filling the list that is shown right now. As you later will understand from this presentation, if I am right about text, there will only be a short window of opportunity to use the above exercise. Soon you will know too much about text to put the phenomenological method to a full test. If you don't know enough about phenomenology, I recommend that you turn to Mark Thorsby's Phenomenology series here on YouTube. If you know German, you can also turn to Tom Poljansek's series. You may also find some one or two of our lectures worth listening to. There are also others worth listening to, such as the channels Absurd Being and Singularity as Sublimity. They comment on books on phenomenology. Of course, you can also read different books. I'm sorry if I've forgotten to mention someone that has done a good YouTube presentation on phenomenology. That is not my intention. Please mention them in the comments. I'd like to express my gratitude to all who have contributed material on phenomenology here on YouTube. It made my task with this presentation much easier as I could build on that material. I hope to have complemented it with a good practical example of how to actually do phenomenology. Having stated all of the above, I can now begin the actual presentation. This presentation consists of 7 lectures, and I have 2 main objectives with it: to explain how to do phenomenology and to describe the phenomenology of the text. and I hope they will mediate each other in a good way. This presentation could be seen as a preparation for judgments concerning text. We need to make relevant experience to form our judgment. Such experiences can be seen as pre-predicative experiences. What we need, then, is a pre-given object, a text, and a pre-given experience, a lived experience, and we will hopefully reach them through phenomenology. In this, we also need to develop our own view of phenomenology and a relevant experience of it, a lived experience, an experience when we use phenomenology. In this approach, phenomenology can be seen as prejudgmental, and thus we should later be able to judge better concerning text and possibly also concerning phenomenology itself. We'll give a first example to show what I mean and what you could expect. If you look at the two text pictures right now, you will judge them in a certain way if you haven't seen them before. With certain experiences of both phenomenology and text, you will probably judge them in another way. Later, you can compare your judgment right now, or the first time you saw the new text, and the judgment that you will be able to form later after this series. So, once again, you need a certain phenomenon to be given, and you need a certain lived experience for that to happen, and they will help you form a judgment later. To make this extra clear, I will give you a further example. You are used to variability concerning typefaces. You have been accustomed to reading many different typefaces. But it could be wrong. If you would have read one and the same typeface for a whole week and then changed typeface, you could experience that change as quite annoying. It could be a valid reason not to change typefaces. But to develop that judgment, you must do that experience. You must acquire such a lived experience. If you don't do it, you will probably think that typeface variability is acceptable. It could be the same for the text I am suggesting. You may need to experience a full week of reading cluster text to form the judgment that we should not read any other kind of text. All this will be clearer at the end of this presentation, but I think you will benefit from hearing it already now at the beginning. You need to acquire a phenomenology to form an object, i.e. a text, and you need a lived experience of it to be able to form a judgment afterwards. In this presentation, I'm giving my suggestion on this matter, and one of my many objectives is that you should be able to evaluate what you should do after these lectures. It is difficult for me to be clear about this right now. I want you to understand that you must find a method to let the true text be given to you, and I suggest that a certain phenomenological approach can help you with that. The method I am suggesting. When you have understood these lectures, I hope you have found your own way to let the text phenomenon appear to you, to let it be given to you. I am giving you my thoughts on this matter, and you should pick what you find important to succeed. If I am right, you must learn phenomenology, or else the full text phenomenon will not be given to you. I made this series from a quick draft, so I hope you will excuse possible shortcomings. This series should not be seen as a full introduction to phenomenology. On the contrary, I am expecting that you are already quite knowledgeable. Hence, this can be seen as more of an intermediate level lecture series. But as Husserl put it, in a sense, we are always beginners in phenomenology. We are always starting anew. So I will try to give numerous comments also for beginners. These comments can be difficult to understand if you don't know enough, so it could be wise to prepare yourself. By this, I want to make it clear that you should not expect a full learning experience from this presentation. I am only aiming at filling a few particular gaps. The main gap I am trying to fill is how to actually do phenomenology. I hope my presentation could serve as a prime example of how to do it. and I hope that you will understand a lot more because of it. I think that the current situation with text gives a great opportunity to understand phenomenology. I am actually quite critical concerning the ordinary ways of presenting phenomenology. Many who talk about it are rarely showcasing a proper phenomenological description. Quite many are talking about phenomenology, about what different phenomenologists thought and so on, especially what Husserl and Heidegger thought. Many are talking about phenomenology as if it's just a theory we should learn more about. You don't learn how to do phenomenology. This is actually quite strange. In a course on logic, it is obvious to do logic, but this is rarely the case concerning phenomenology. I understand why this happens. It's quite challenging. It is difficult. But still, I think it would be beneficial if more phenomenologists could showcase their best examples of relevant phenomenological descriptions and how they were made. Too often, a little is mentioned about a box, a house, a wine glass, a table, or a tree. What you often will encounter, for example here on YouTube, is a certain speech about phenomenology. As it seems, many have rarely used any phenomenology. Some professors install themselves in a certain talk about it, but they are rarely showing a phenomenological description. Phenomenology is often seen as theory, and is often learned as such, and not as an activity, method, or a tool. I will try to do otherwise and showcase my best example of how to do phenomenology. It is almost always possible to be more rigorous in a presentation such as this one, and in the future I will probably write 1 or 2 books on this matter, if I get the opportunity. This presentation can thus be seen as the beginning of that project. It could be seen as a first draft. If you think something important is missing, please let me know in the comments, so that I possibly could incorporate it in the books. I see phenomenology more as an activity. In my opinion, few will become phenomenologically active by listening to ordinary lectures on phenomenology. Some lecturers are even delivering a critique of phenomenology or a particular kind of phenomenology, for example the Husserlian one, without actually having performed a phenomenological production. This is quite annoying. It's like developing a critique of proofs in mathematics without actually having done a proof. I think it's better to see phenomenologists in the same way as logicians, mathematicians, engineers, or rigorous scientists who actually are doing something. Through the text example, I hope to show how phenomenology can be done. I hope I will be able to deliver an experience that will enable you to understand much about phenomenology. And with phenomenology, I always mean Husserlian phenomenology, i.e. transcendental phenomenology. The French philosopher Paul Ricoeur said that the history of phenomenology to a great extent is the history of Husserlian heresies. I am more of an orthodox Husserlian. In my opinion, it's best to start from Husserl. I think we should go back to Husserl. That is why I think phenomenology is in dire need of rehabilitation. And in this lecture series I will give my ideas on how to rehabilitate phenomenology. Nowadays much is called phenomenology. Even the thinnest analysis or qualitative study of an experience or a feeling is presented under the umbrella term phenomenology. In my opinion, this has not served phenomenology well. I think it's better to dismiss most of the heretics as phenomenoticians and see them as belonging to a phenomenological tradition called phenomenomics. It could be seen as a fork of the Husserlian tradition, of the phenomenological tradition proper, so to speak. And as a first suggestion, I mean that this could be decided through the attitude that is shown in different works. To call something phenomenology you should at least have tried to use the transcendental phenomenological approach rigorously. If you have and you didn't succeed, you could use another approach said to be phenomenological. What I now said about phenomeноtics is a distinction I think is helpful. I will try to introduce some such distinctions. They may not be entirely clear, but I hope they will serve as a good start for further thinking and learning. You should try to decide if they also could be helpful to you. So, how do you know that you have understood phenomenology? Understanding is always already used, as Hans-Georg Gadamer put it in Truth and Method. Thus, we should be able to use phenomenology. Most do not use it. They will just start a certain phenomenological discourse. If you listen to some 1 or 2 hour lectures here on YouTube, you will notice this. I often wish they had presented their best use of phenomenology. You may need to be quite critical when you hear people say something about phenomenology, especially if you haven't seen their phenomenological descriptions. This also applies to philosophers within the so-called phenomenological movement. And by that I mean those who came after Husserl, such as Heidegger, Sartre and others. I call it the phenomenological movement. I should also give you a little information about my background. It is actually in the theory and practice of learning. I have a background in pedagogy and I used phenomenology, to find the cluster text, which is a text that is better to read. You will learn about that text soon, if you don't already know about it. In my younger years I read a lot and I found it quite annoying that you are not allowed only to read much to learn. My basic view on learning is that we should read more, much more, and that tests should be used frequently. What Husserl says about science in general, i.e. that a firmer foundation is needed, is certainly true concerning the theory and practice of learning, especially in Sweden, where I am from. At the moment, in 2024, we are having a terrible education system. It is quite odd because we had a fairly decent system in the 1980s. Now it's getting worse almost by the year. Because of this, it's almost impossible to do research. The standard is too low. Pupils and students cannot even read properly. They are almost not reading at all. One survey stated that most pupils read less than 2 pages a day in school. That is less than 5 minutes a day. As a student at university, more than 20 years ago, I started to pose basic questions about learning. I thought that almost everything was done wrong, and from that background, and with something close to a phenomenological method, I found the cluster text, the ideal text. And that is why I'm able to give you this presentation, and I hope it will help you understand phenomenology. I think you will benefit from having experienced a phenomenological description of text, i.e. a phenomenology of text, and by this strategy I hope to mediate thoughts on phenomenology at the same time. I will soon give you a quick recap on phenomenology, but first I should give you a description of the text. In the life world, we often meet the text to the left. It is the ordinary text style that you almost always encounter in books. It can be seen as our starting point. It's what the natural attitude has produced for 1,000 years. I call such text rectangle text. It's 2 rectangles placed on a third rectangle. 2 text frames are placed on a spread. When I use the phenomenological method, the method of intentional analysis, I end up with the text to the right. I call it a cluster text as the sentences are set in clusters. It can be understood as a phenomenologized text. That text could be 10 to 40% better to read and use, at least if you're an advanced reader, reading an advanced text for an extended period of time. The cluster text reduces the amount of regressions, which lowers the perceptual load. thus it is easier to read faster and more. In words per minute it could be a little better, but in day and week spans it could be significantly better. You will be able to read in longer sessions, in more sessions a day, and with shorter breaks. As it seems, nobody has written books like this before. As you understand, this is why I, at the beginning, told you to use phenomenology to produce a phenomenological text description. I wonder whether all phenomenologists will reach a cluster text in such a description. If this idea of a cluster text will spread, there is only a short window of opportunity to explore whether other phenomenologists would have described the same phenomenon, i.e. whether the cluster text would have presented itself to them. Did you end up with such a text if you tried to use it? What did you end up with, and why? I thought it would be interesting to see if almost all phenomenologists would end up with the text close to the cluster text. When the cluster text is publicly known, this is not possible to test. Soon, people will know too much. There are many questions to pose concerning this. If people ended up with something else, we could wonder whether they then actually were doing phenomenology. If you know about phenomenology, you could pose many such questions. In this presentation, I see it as if we are being in truth concerning the cluster text. I'm doing an epoche concerning its truth, otherwise I would have needed to give a lot of comments such as if this text is true and so on. Even if the cluster text is not true or better for everyone, it can probably still be used to understand phenomenology. It could then be used as if it was true. I recommend that you postpone the question of its truth and see it as true within these lectures. You can explore the matter of truth afterwards, for example, when you read a cluster text on your own. If you already have read a cluster text, for example in one of my books, I am assuming that you already know that it is better. At this point, if you don't have read a cluster text, you may be quite skeptical. Could it really be the case that all texts are wrong? At this point, you may prefer another text style and think you are right in doing that. You may want to stay in your old ways. If that is the case, you can use this situation to learn about your way of relating to yourself, the world, and other people. You can also see how reluctant you are to a new phenomenon. You can use this situation to see how you are constituting meaning and what layers are affecting you. You can see how you are constituting your world, i.e., how your natural attitude works. Whatever you will think, I recommend that you think twice about it and explore it further. Some people who have seen the cluster text said it doesn't look good. Others have questioned the extra use of paper. I found this quite perplexing. If it is 10 to 20% better to read, why do people even care about such questions? You can take notice of what you will think concerning this matter. You can begin by noting what you immediately thought about the cluster text, and when you then decide to experience it, you can note how your thoughts change. It will be interesting for both me and you to see if you will immediately start using the cluster text if you find it better, and also if you will stop using all other texts. It will be interesting to see how rigorous we will be in this. I have already started to use cluster text almost all the time. You must decide what you should do, and my objective is to assist you in your decision. I think you will be able to learn about phenomenological matter just by being in this situation. In the natural attitude, you will probably be a little skeptical. To experience the text phenomenon properly, you must change your attitude. You must change to the proper attitude, so to speak. You need to muster some interest, you must want to have a certain experience, and you also need to change some of your views. All this could be important to understand phenomenology. To do phenomenology, you must also experience some such changes. In this situation, you can learn about the process in which you learn to see a phenomenon in a different way, in a certain way. You can do this both concerning text and phenomenology. You may change what you think about both text and phenomenology, and you can inquire into how this happens. For example, you can see if it's a gradual or stepwise process. Most interesting is of course to see what will cause you to make the leap to start using another text. But since this series is mainly about phenomenology, it could be just as interesting to see how your attitude towards phenomenology changes. It's not as easy to start using phenomenology, but I hope you will see that it could be quite useful, and I hope you will learn a lot about it. In these lectures I will try to mediate phenomenology, and it will be my quite personal take on it. This shows a common starting point in Husserlian Phenomenology, that consciousness is always consciousness of something, that a phenomenon is always a phenomenon for someone, and thus that phenomenology is always a phenomenology for someone. In these lectures I am showing a description of how phenomenology has appeared to me, i.e. how it was given to me. I am mainly inspired by Husserlian phenomenology, and as I stated before, I even think the phenomenological tradition needs rehabilitation. We need to go back to Husserl, as phenomenology has been led astray. As I see it, it got derailed by Heidegger. I don't see Heidegger as a phenomenologist. I think it's better to see him as a phenomenotician. He is doing phenomenotics in a phenomenological way, which is different from doing phenomenology. He is not a phenomenologist doing phenomenology in a phenomenological way. I think phenomenotician is a good word, as it is close to hermeneutician. Phenomeноtics can often be understood as phenomenological hermeneutics or hermeneutic phenomenology. You can assume this distinction to explore whether it also works for you. Heidegger and many later thinkers' way of looking at phenomena is often more practical than theoretical, more precognitive than cognitive. Often too much is taken for granted. You become too naive, too psychologistic, or too naturalistic. In the tradition that is now often referred to as the phenomenological tradition, thoughts from both Heidegger and Husserl are often intertwined. I think we need to go back to Husserl and start afresh. We need to untangle the Heideggerian thread, so to speak. This does not mean that I am highly critical of that thread, i.e. that I think it is completely wrong. It can be used, but I think that we first should use a proper Husserlian or transcendental phenomenology before we do phenomenologics. This will be clearer ahead. At this point, I hope you understand that anyone could have used the Husserlian method to find a cluster text, and that you, by leaving the Husserlian approach, easily will miss it. This could be true for many phenomena, so now I will give a quick recap of Husserlian phenomenology. I recommend you to be uncritical and absorb as much as you can of Husserlian phenomenology. Try to really get into it, to feel at home in it. Too many are describing or interpreting Husserlian phenomenology instead of using it. And because of this, they will often misinterpret it. A misinterpretation is made when you are not able to use it. The so-called phenomenological tradition can be seen as a tradition of misinterpretations. I think it's better that you try to work your way into Husserlian phenomenology. If you will be able to use it, or understand the use of it, such as the use in this presentation, you will be much better equipped to understand what others have said about phenomenology and be critical of it. When you have used phenomenology, you can be critical in a better way. If you are able to follow the Husserlian instructions, you will not misinterpret different aspects as easily as many others have done. The first thing to adopt is to try to see phenomenology, and thus philosophy, in general, as a universal science, as a first philosophy and rigorous science. You need to adopt a kind of foundationalist attitude. You must strive to reach knowledge, or logos of phenomena, hence the term phenomenology. If you are not adopting that attitude, but are still taking interest in phenomena, for example, by doing interpretations in a kind of phenomenological hermeneutics, you are doing phenomeноtics. It is different from Husserlian phenomenology. Not rarely is it based on some misconceptions of it. Husserl possibly got the attitude of rigorousness from two of his professors, Karl Weierstrass and Franz Brentano. You must read about Weierstrass. He was forced to live a peculiar life. From a young age he loved mathematics and excelled in it, but his father wanted him to go into business, which he failed to do, and then he became a teacher. In his spare time he continued doing mathematics, and in time he became a distinguished professor in Berlin. Perseverance is certainly something we can learn from Weierstrass. To do phenomenology, it is important for us to learn it. Weierstrass made mathematical analysis more rigorous, and he is sometimes referred to as the father of modern analysis. He was also interested in elliptic functions, a theme that soon will lead us to another mathematician. You must also read about one of Weierstrass's students, Sofia Kovalevskaya. She also had an inspiring life. She had to endure hardships, but eventually she became one of the first female professors in mathematics. We can learn to persevere also from her. Perseverance is vital to do phenomenology, and that is why I'm mentioning these people here. I feel inspired when I read about them. Hopefully you will feel that too, and that is why you should also read about them. We should try to build rigor and perseverance, and this is my suggestion of how to achieve that. If this doesn't work for you, you should try to develop it in your own way. Another one who had to go through hardships was Husserl's friend Georg Cantor. He was one of the most innovative and original thinkers in mathematics. So original that other mathematicians mocked him and refused to give him a professorship in Berlin, a great dream of his. He suffered greatly, but he persevered, and he is sometimes referred to as the father of set theory. And because of him, we can now say that there exists an infinity of infinities, and that they are of different sizes. To infinity and beyond. Quite mind-blowing. You should read about him too. Different class, as the famous Irish sports commentator Jimmy McGee would have described it. Later, we will turn to an entirely different kind of infinity, Emmanuel Levinas's infinity of the face-to-face situation. These geniuses were Husserl's friends, and he possibly learned how to persevere and to be rigorous and foundationalist because of them. We also need to learn that, and that is why I'm mentioning all this here. A few words from Samuel Beckett could possibly also assist us in our mission to develop perseverance. You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on. From the unnameable 1953. And ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better. From Worsted Hoe, 1983. In short, persevere, persevere, persevere. If you try to do phenomenology, you will understand why this is needed. At times it will be challenging and exhausting. Earlier I mentioned elliptic curves. Andrew Wiles presented his proof of Fermat's last theorem in 1993 under the title Modular Forms, Elliptic Curves and Galois Representations. He had to persevere to solve Fermat's last theorem. In a recent interview, he stated that you should not be too smart, just a little smart. If everything is too easy from a young age, you may not learn how to persevere. You must be able to pick a problem and stay with it for many years. If you have not seen the documentary Fermat's Last Theorem, you should, as soon as you can. It will lift your spirit. In it, Andrew Wiles talks about the dark room being lit. I hope you will get that feeling concerning texts, and possibly also concerning phenomenology through this series. I hope you will be able to see things you couldn't see before, and that you will see exactly where we are. Here is how Wiles told it. Perhaps I could best describe my experience of doing mathematics in terms of entering a dark mansion. One goes into the first room and it's dark, completely dark. One stumbles around, bumping into the furniture, and gradually you learn where each piece of furniture is. And finally, after 6 months or so, you find a light switch. You turn it on, and suddenly it's all illuminated. You can see exactly where you were. I think that learning about Weierstrass, Kovalevskaya, Cantor, Wiles, and other such people is a good strategy before you start learning about phenomenology. It will infuse a certain spirit. When we have adopted that spirit, we have prepared ourselves to do phenomenology. Husserl was not too smart. He learned how to persevere. Slowly, he found his way. He got a PhD in mathematics and studied psychology and philosophy under Franz Brentano, who saw philosophy as a rigorous science. To develop phenomenology, Husserl combined his knowledge in mathematics, science, psychology, and philosophy. In periods, he wrote furiously. He certainly learned how to persevere. In one of his letters, Husserl stated the following: I'm consumed by only one thing. I must come to clarity, or else I cannot live. In phenomenology, that attitude may be needed. It could help us to persevere. It could be important both in phenomenology and concerning the text. I had to persevere for many years to get closer to the text phenomenon. You may also need to persevere a little to get closer to it. I hope you soon feel that you must come to clarity concerning texts. If we see phenomenology as a universal and rigorous philosophy underpinning science, it can be seen as pre-theoretical, pre-logical, pre-empirical, and pre-moral. An easy way to understand this is that when we have reached a theory, we are leaving phenomenology. When we are trying to explain something, we are leaving phenomenology. When we are trying to establish facts through experiences, we are leaving phenomenology. When we are using logical analysis, we are leaving phenomenology. And when we are turning to morality, we are leaving phenomenology. In phenomenology, we should clarify essences and describe phenomena. We should produce descriptions, and then, in the following step, we can use logic, mathematics, and turn to science or morality, and so on. All those areas can be seen as subsequent steps to phenomenology. Regarding the cluster text, it can now be seen as pre-theoretical, pre-logical, pre-empirical, and pre-moral. First, we must assemble all its essences properly, and then we may proceed by turning to other areas. In phenomenology, it is important to stay phenomenocentric. In philosophy, it is easy to become egocentric, not egocentric. You turn to the ego and, for example, wonder whether we really can know things, and so on, as Descartes, Locke, Kant, and many others have done. In science, it is easy to become object-centered. In phenomenology, we should try to avoid both. We should stay phenomenocentric and describe phenomena through their essences and our own intentionality. Different phenomenologists understand the way to reach and describe phenomena differently, but they agree that we should always try to stay focused on the phenomena. In Husserlian Phenomenology, you should try to reach essences, and it should result in a description of essences within a phenomenon. Not a theory, not a fact, not a deduction, not an induction. But we are preparing for them. The essences could be seen as pointing to certain such uses. You must also prepare yourself to let a phenomenon appear, or else you will not be able to give a description of it. An essence could be seen as something that will let a phenomenon appear. Out of almost nothing, you can turn a certain minuscule beginning into something. There is a world, or consciousness is there, and through them an essence may appear, which you then can build upon to let a phenomenon appear. In this series, we will let a certain text phenomenon appear. We will also let a certain view on phenomenology appear. You must prepare yourself to let both of them appear to you. I'm trying to prepare you for it. An example concerning texts is that the essence of a text, not an ideal text, is possibly that it is a thing that could be read. A text is a thing to be read. When you can read something, you know that it is a text. A text has been presented to you. It has been given to you in consciousness as a text. The essence of an ideal text is probably that it is a thing you can read and use efficiently. An ideal text is a thing to be read and used efficiently. Easy and forthright, trivial. But as we now know, through the cluster text style, it has been difficult to actually see text in this way. People produced rectangle text through a process in which they looked at text and made them look good. Many have stated that the text is a thing to be read, but failed to produce an efficient text. By this, we learn that trivial essences could be difficult to manage. They are so obvious that we sometimes don't understand what they actually mean. We will easily drop back to the natural attitude and start to go about things in our ordinary ways. This is trivial. Okay, move along. Nothing to see here, people. Or is there? Concerning the ideal text, its essence, i.e., that it is a thing to be read and used efficiently, could be seen as a whole. But an ideal text consists of many parts, and we should look at them through the essence. It is difficult to do so, but we must persevere and learn to see the essences for the parts. Right now, I will just give you one example to exemplify this. Later, I will give many parts of a text. One example of an essence is that the letters, words and characters of a previous sentence don't belong to the following sentence. It's obvious, trivial. This you will intuit every time. It's evident. It's an essence. But it has been difficult to put it into practice in an actual text in a fruitful manner. It's difficult turning essences into their proper existence. In a cluster text, this is done through the cluster space, i.e. the larger sentence spacing. You will get many such examples later. Now I just wanted to exemplify an essence that is trivial but important for letting the text phenomenon appear. The structure of consciousness enables it to habituate a world. It enables us to intuit essences and to expand from them. Our stream of consciousness needs very little to generate a lot more. A minuscule beginning could spiral into something quite substantial. Sometimes it will be knowledge, often it will be mere absurdities. As you experience this presentation, you must decide whether I am expressing knowledge or mere absurdities. An easy way to understand essences is that they can be seen as enablers of certain experiences. This does not mean that all of us will be able to turn them into their proper experiences. In history, Newton and Einstein and other such geniuses saw something in a new way. This can be seen as if they saw something through an essence, and after them many are able to see what they saw. It is easy, comparatively. It is easier. Now, concerning text, it's easy to see the essence of sentence spacing being put into its proper existence. But it was impossible to do it before. It's so easy that they may wonder how everybody could have missed it. This happens because of the structure of consciousness. This is what easily happens to us. It's what consciousness often does to us. Now, I hope you can see that an essence could enable a certain experience and that someone must experience it first, which can be hard, but when it happens, almost everyone will be able to see it. Now, or soon, it is easy for you to see the proper sentence spacing. Later, it will be easy for you to see all the other essences of a cluster text. To manage the gaps between essences and existences is an extraordinarily difficult task within phenomenology. This you will understand through the extraordinarily difficult task concerning texts. Actually, it is really easy concerning texts, but it was difficult to see it the first time. You may feel that it's difficult now, but soon it will be easy. In phenomenology, trivialities are often stated, and because of this, probably, some have found it hard to be fascinated by it. Sometimes only trivialities are stated, and still they are quite often described in lengthy and intricate ways. This is true of much philosophy. It is sometimes said that phenomenology and continental philosophy in general are lengthy texts about things that could have been stated on a single page. This is also true of the text phenomenon. It could possibly have been enough to show a spread of a cluster text. It says it all. Or does it? It was difficult to reach such a text, and that may require a lengthy description so that we could learn from it. Husserl's texts are lengthy, intricate, and challenging. He wrestled with his problems and tried to get to the point, but it wasn't easy. In periods, he wrote furiously. Many questions arose. Will you be able to reach the same point from another starting point? From another perspective? If you at some occasions see it as if he is only stating a triviality, it is quite difficult to get hooked. But this is probably also why some people get hooked, such as me. When you see certain trivialities under certain aspects, you often feel that you are seeing something special, that you are seeing a little more than you could before. When you learn to see things through phenomenology, through the phenomenological method, you feel as if there is no end to its possibilities. I hope you will experience this through this presentation, and especially through my text example. As I see it, phenomenology is, among other things, meant to bring forth essences that make us see a little further. In my view, Husserl tried to become a phenomenologist, as am I. As he stated it, you are always a beginner in phenomenology. You must always try to see things anew. It is difficult and it requires a lot of training. Few accepted this circumstance. Instead of training themselves to be able to do it, many just took a few insights and went ahead with their own projects. But Husserl pushed himself, and so did I. I did it with the text. It took me many years, and it's still continuing. If you understand phenomenology, it could consummate your life. I am still in training. This presentation is also part of my training. Right now, you may also have begun your training concerning both phenomenology and texts. You must learn how texts should be seen, and you may be able to do it through phenomenology. The two deciding essences in phenomenology is that the essence of consciousness is its intentionality, i.e., that consciousness is always consciousness of something, and that a world is always already constituted in consciousness. This could be seen as the basic whole in Husserlian phenomenology, and thus it should be seen in all its parts. The world and consciousness are interrelated. The world can be seen as the background to consciousness, to intentionality. The world constituted in consciousness is realized through its intentionality. You cannot think of consciousness without its constituted world. Thus, it's an essence. Husserl was interested in how this happens. In general, his question could be stated in this way. How do we constitute our world? From the beginning, he was more interested in how we could constitute objective knowledge. He started his logical investigations from that departure, and late in his life he ended up with the notion of the life world, die Lebenswelt, i.e. the constituted world in which our life is lived and experienced. As I stated earlier, essences are often trivial. The difficulty is first how to see them, and then how to proceed from them, how to expand them. It's easy to state that consciousness always is consciousness of something, but how do we proceed from that? Phenomenology could be seen as an answer to that question. It is a way to proceed, a way to expand. The phenomenological method is a way to find essences and how to proceed from them, how to expand them. You could become interested in how this happens, and you could start to do it if you learn phenomenology. Now you have got a few things to ponder, and thus we can summarize this first lecture. We need to learn how to persevere, and if we learn to do it, we will be able to do phenomenology. To do phenomenology, we must also change our attitude. We must change as a person. We need to develop the ability to dwell on a phenomenon, to try to see it in new ways, to learn to see what should be obvious. This is easier with the phenomenological method, which we should acquaint ourselves with in the next lecture. Furthermore, we should not be led astray by the phenomenoticians. This is also easier to resist if we actually know how to use the phenomenological method. I hope I have prepared you for that method through this first lecture so that you can learn it in the next one. And now you should also be on your way to use all this concerning the text phenomenon.